there's been an evolution from when I first started these conversations. These conversations started with just friends and family members here in the United States. And then something happened. I started branching out. I started reaching out to other people via Instagram. And that's how I got connected with Lewis Huckstep. For anyone who remembers the conversation I had with Lewis, it's how I got connected with Todd Jarrett and Ash Hamilton. And I have with me today someone also from the wonderful land down under. I have Jessica Ella. And so Jessica, I want to just thank you for your time and for agreeing to the conversation.
Thanks for having me. It's going to be fun.
Absolutely. We had a brief conversation, I think it was a couple days ago, and that conversation was absolutely incredible in my opinion. And I think one of the things that we would agree upon is that there is an aligned mission, there's an aligned purpose, and we're striving for the same thing. And I feel like I can't say that without qualifying it by asking you about your story. So, for anyone that would watch this or anyone that would listen to this, can you tell me about yourself? Can you tell me a little bit about your story and what set you on the journey to where you're now looking to help? I forget how you described it. We all suffer to some degree, but my understanding is you want to help people suffer well and come out on the other side. So walk me through your own journey.
Absolutely. I think I've always had a really high amount of empathy, which at times I thought was a curse, but I've learned to understand that that is a gift. And I think a lot of the time I focus on other people's suffering as a way to in turn heal myself. So my healing journey really started with me becoming obsessed with how healing works. And I was always wanting to learn and educate myself to help other people. And it wasn't for a really long time that I actually came to realize that I was actually learning all of those tools for myself. And I think a lot of people in the healing industry do this. We get into healing because we want to help other people. There's an unconscious part of ourselves that still needs to be saved or healed, or there's parts of ourselves that we haven't met yet or haven't worked through yet. And that was definitely the case for me. I was obsessed from the very get-go of my entry into the healing world with trauma. And I've always been real led towards complex trauma and kind of the worst of the worst. And I think, as I said to you on the phone the other day, suffering is inevitable and every person suffers and every person has some level of trauma. But what that I was finding was that most modalities that were out there were really useful for people that had had a small amount of trauma or who'd had some, we'll call them little t traumas, but who had had like a generally positive upbringing, but they hadn't, and they'd had a couple of things happen that was sort of, holding them back in life. But there wasn't really anything out there that was working deep enough with complex trauma, with the people that have had childhoods that you can't even believe that they're real. Childhoods where they were neglected and tortured and abused and sexually, physically, verbally abused, like people that had been repeatedly abused so often that it just became a part of who they were and survival became their entire existence. And there was nothing out there that was touching the complexity of those situations, and therefore those people weren't healing. And then the messaging that they were getting was, you can't heal from that. You can learn to manage it. You can feel a bit better, but you'll never like fully heal from that. You'll never fully be where everybody else is at because your brain's different, your nervous system's different, your brain's changed. There's been damage done there that can't be undone. And for me, that was just not acceptable, not good enough. And that was my entire mission, was to be the example of somebody who can heal through anything and come out the other side. And so my mission was in the beginning, helping other people understanding healing just from a really logical perspective. I'd had some healing sessions done when I was like 19, 20 years old. And in my mind at the time, they were quite woo woo, quite spiritual. And the logical part of me was like, yeah, but like what's actually happening? There's got to be some tangible evidence there. There's got to be some information around like what's actually happening. Like we can't just say that we moved energy. What's happening here? So the logical, intellectual side of me was really wanting to understand why and how, why we heal, why can two people do the same thing and one person heals and one person doesn't? Why does one person rave about breath work and hates NLP and another person loves NLP and hates hypnotherapy or hates EMDR, whatever? Like, why are people doing different things and it's only working for some people? Why doesn't it work for everybody? And I just went so deep into those questions and into this uncovering of information of like, okay, so we're reprogramming the mind, but what's happening in the body? What's happening in the soul? How does that change our belief system? How does that change this? How does, and how does it all interconnect? And it was just like, I felt like that movie, A Beautiful Mind, like for 10 years, just having all these pieces spread out and connecting all these dots and like going from like spirituality and Buddhism through to Joe Dispenza to quantum physics to more traditional psychology to beliefs to just intertwining all of these different types of healing and these different understandings of healing and self and what we're here for and what we're here to do, to experience what life should look like if you are healed. All of that. I just went so deep, and I was 10 years deep into having studied multiple different certifications. I'd done like 15 at the time. I'd spent thousands of hours watching documentaries. I'd read all the books. And it wasn't until that sort of 10 years into my healing journey that I will call it remembered all of the trauma that was actually really fueling my mission. And so
Mm,
when I say remembered, it can be a little bit confusing to people because there's this paradox, right? Of I knew that there was something dark that I was pushing down. I was having flashbacks and nightmares of the trauma, but I had found a way to split the flashbacks and the remembering. I'd found a way to split that into, I mean, this is what DID is, dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities. I'd found a way to, when I would have a flashback of a traumatic memory, I would have this like technique where I would blink. I didn't know I was doing this. I would just developed this from childhood where I would blink my eyes really hard and I would say to myself, there's something wrong with you. You're disgusting. Why are you thinking about that? And that would allow me to push it back down and to never actually look at what's happening over here. And so there was this really profound day where I'd done 10 years of healing work. I'd worked with thousands of people. I'd been healing people. I'd been getting amazing results. I'd been doing my own work. And I had this day where I was doing a meditation around increasing my intuition. And when I was in this meditation, I saw these memories that I'd been having flashbacks of my whole life. But for the first time in my life, because I was in a meditative state, I was doing this thing where we had to go and we had to open this box and there was a message in the box. And I was like, oh, this is fun. I opened the box and these memories came out. And it was the first time in my life that I saw them. My initial response was, oh, why are these memories in the box? And then it was followed by, hold on, why the fuck is that happening? What? And it was like I'd seen it for the first time, although I'd seen the memories thousands of times all throughout my life. And so it's really such a testament to how strong our mind is and how we can actually have something right in front of us and we can see it and we can know it and we can not know it at the exact same time. And my
mm,
consciousness was split and I all of a sudden saw these memories. And so I'll give some context for anyone that's like, what the fuck is she talking about? And the memories that I saw and the memories that I had been having flashbacks of was being sexually abused by my father all throughout my childhood, being raped by his father, being tortured by the two of them in a very sadistic way, verbal abuse, physical abuse, like all of these things that I knew, and I even have the scars of, and they have a permanently deaf ear. Like there are so many things that I knew had happened from somewhere, but consciously I split it off because I wanted to continue to love my father because I was afraid of him. I was afraid. I was always told by him that if I was to tell anybody about what he was doing, that he would kill me. He used to tell me exactly how he'd kill me and where he would bury me in the backyard. And so for survival, I pushed it down and I tried to forget about it. And I created two personalities and I created ways where when I would remember the awful things that they were doing to me, and I would feel the shock and the panic and the terror and the horror, I would just blink really hard and tell myself that I'm fucked up for thinking about that. And it just allowed me to continue being normal. And it's one of the most powerful, like, it's frustrating because I suffered throughout my entire teens and 20s, wanting to kill myself every day, having this darkness just following me around and having no idea why I felt so fucked up. But at the same time, it saved me because
Mm,
people who don't forget and their brain doesn't adapt in that way and not here. They end up with psychosis. They end up hospitalized. They end up addicted. And I actually met a really lovely lady who specializes, she came on my podcast, and she specializes in repressed memory. And she's from the US. And she said that it's one of the most powerful ways to cope is to forget. And it's actually so much more common than what people realize. And so I split myself into two really very different personalities, one who held all the rage and the truth and the memories, and one who just excessively loved and adored my father. And I just flipped between the two, and I just managed my life as in these two completely different, we have different expressions of self, but two personalities is very different experience. And I basically, that was the way that I coped, was to move between those personalities. And that was when it really began, because all of a sudden I had all these tools. I'd done all the studies, and all of a sudden it was like, now I have to apply it, and now I have to face this. And that's the hardest thing, was now I can't have my father in my life. I can't have him around my children. He's actually a criminal, and he's actually a really dangerous person. And what do I do with this information? And then began like cutting him out and then grieving him, even though he was awful. There was this grieving process. And I often say to people, this is just like a snippet. I've had Lyme disease, I've had health conditions, I've had terrible relationships, I've had like trauma on trauma on trauma. But I often say to people, it's such a blessing, because all the layers that I've gone through in having to cut people out of my life, in going through intense shock and horror and pain, and then going through breakups and a divorce and health conditions, I can understand the suffering of any person. I can relate to it in some way, because there's no category of trauma that I haven't experienced.
mm,
And that felt like a curse for a really long time, but it is such a blessing, because I can fully understand human suffering from all elements, because I've been there, and then I've brought myself through it and out of it. So I've got this like roadmap now of where to take people. And it's something that you can learn, but lived experience is just it's just a whole other situation. Like, when you've been there, you can guide people so deeply. So
mm,
that's kind of like that's the overview. I mean, there's so much more. There's so much more like bullying and so much more trauma that occurred. But really, the gist of it is that life hit me really hard from really early on, and it just kept hitting for a while.
mm. Can't imagine going through everything that you went through. And you shared with me over the phone a few days ago everything that you had been through in your childhood and then in relationships. And then you mentioned Lyme disease. And most people would collapse. You talked about even the suicidal ideations. You talked about all those times when you were tempted to give up. You were tempted to give in. You were tempted to just end it all. And yet there's obviously something at some point in some way clicked inside of you, registered inside of you, because here we are and you're still here. And I think that there's such a beauty in that. There's such a power in that, that despite everything that you've been through, you're still here. You found the courage, you found the strength, you found the fortitude, you found the resolve to, the only word that I know how to use is overcome. Overcome everything that you had been through. But one of the questions that I have, because you talked about DID, you talked about multiple personalities, you talked about the part of you that wanted to love, and we talked about that over the phone about your capacity to love and be loved. On the one hand, you had this part of you that wanted to love and was maybe able to love deeply, but on the other part, you had that anger. and that rage, and how do you either reconcile the two, or how do you live with the tension? So here's the question that I have: which one was the truer version of who you were, or is who you actually were place in the middle, someplace between the love and the rage? What is actually, or what did you find was the truest expression of yourself?
I always think about the fact that, passion is love and anger mixed together. Like you're not super passionate about something unless there is a little bit of anger and frustration. And anyone that's done anything through passion has come from some level of suffering, and there's some level of anger around like things need to change, the world needs to change. And so I think it is that blend. I tend to be very intentional about what I get angry because I have
Mm,
control over what I am angry about now. I think obviously love was the more, like, I think love is our most pure nature. Like I think that we all inherently just want love, and we want to come back to love, and unconditional love is that like pure state. And I think that anytime, but I also don't see anger as a bad thing anymore. I think there's a lot of
mm,
people who think that if you have anger it means that you're not healed, or if you have anger it means it's like a bad emotion. But anger is just a compass for us to show us like where something doesn't feel right. And so if I feel anger when I see something on social media, like what's that telling me? It's not a trigger. It's not a past wound. Like now it's anger around, it's my compass. That doesn't feel right. That's not right for people. We need to educate people. Like it can be a compass, but I think there's a difference between anger in current situations and like repressed rage.
mm,
And what I was feeling was, there was a period of time where I was fluctuating between, like, my initial response with my father was straight to guilt. It was like, if I cut him out of my life and tell him that I remember everything and that I can't have him in my life, he's going to be alone and I'm going to feel bad for him. And my default was like sympathy and empathy. And I had to let that be a stage where I felt that, and I didn't go back to him, but I allowed myself to feel the empathy and the sadness, which was grief. It was grief that I was going to lose him. It was grief that, the version of him that I created in my mind wasn't real. I created this little highlight reel of like good dad and just held on to that when really he was an actual psychopath and a really twisted criminal man. Like he wasn't. So I had to grieve that. I think after I grieved that, there was anger. And what people don't realize is like that irrational rage, that intense rage, what we do with it is up to us. So for me, I knew that it was old anger. I knew that it was like teenage me and little me that wanted to scream. It was teenage me and little me that was like, this isn't fair. This is not right. So I said those words out loud and I screamed underwater for like 3 months. I would go down to the beach and I would like have a tantrum underwater. And I knew that this was part of the healing process. Where people get really confused is they feel the anger come up and they think they have to do something with it. They think it's them and it's him and I'm going to write him a letter, or I'm going to go to him and I'm going to confront him, or I'm going to do this.
mm,
And it all comes from them wanting there to be like some repercussions for the person, whereas the anger is inside of us. And for me, it was just a process of getting it out. And even when I shared online, I was very intentional about, why am I sharing this? Am I sharing this to shame him? Am I sharing this to trauma dump on people? Like, and if it was coming from that place, it wouldn't be shared. I was very intentional with, if I'm going to share something, I'm going to share it after I've worked through it, with the intention of, I'm going to tell you that I went through this because I want you to know that you can actually heal too. And when you said before, like, I've survived it, or I've not survived it, but you said something along the lines of like, I've come out the other side. For me, it was never about making it through. I was like, we're not just going to make it through. We're going to fucking thrive.
mm,
I don't want to come just manage it or just come out the other side of it. I was like, I want to live a life that is so on purpose and so inspired and so just like nothing I ever could have imagined, because I just want to go that far. I want it to be, and I do have that life now. I wanted safe love, and I wanted healthy relationships and healthy friendships, and I wanted to feel calm in my body and just so like lit up by life and have abundance. And I wanted all of that, not just coping or not just coming out the other side. And that like really is what propelled me. Like that's my mission, is like for people to realize that the life that you're currently living doesn't have to resemble anything that you've been through. It doesn't have to doesn't have to have anything to do with it anymore. Like you can actually almost become an entirely different person once you've shifted through it all. Like you can become the version of you that you may have been, maybe even a better version if all those things didn't happen. So I use those layers to feel everything, but also to up-level my identity essentially, because I went from why did this happen to me? And like this victim mindset, and then there was a version of me that got stuck in why did this happen to me? And then I had to work through those layers of self to get into the like this is shit that this happened to me. And then the anger came, and then it was like it was no longer apathy and a victim mindset. It was like, this is bullshit and I'm angry and I'm pissed off. And that was when I started to go down the pathway of like maybe going to court and started getting a case together. And I eventually moved on from that. But I went through these different layers of emotion, but also of self, of is that serving me? Is that where I want to go? Is that aligning with who I want to be next? Is that aligning with where I want to go? And it just fueled that deeper work to keep going, to keep becoming that next version of myself.
One of our mutual friends and connections is Lewis Huckstep. And one of the things that Lewis says in some of his content, but also something that he stated when he came on and had a conversation with me, is he described life as not being what happens to us, but what happens for us. Life is not so much about what happens to us, but it's about what happens through us. And I appreciate everything that you said, because it would be very easy for you to have spent so much of your time, effort, and energy, even now, as you're helping other people, it'd be very easy for you to still live in some type of state of victimhood where you still see yourself as a victim. And I'm beginning to learn that there is a drastic difference between acute victimhood and chronic victimhood. And there are some people, they are addicted to being victims. They are addicted to trauma. They are addicted, as you said, you talked about sharing without trauma dumping. There are people that are addicted to trauma dumping. And you talked earlier how you are an empathetic person. And I think sometimes empathy can be a curse, because if the wrong person gets a hold of your empathy, they can drain you. They can suck the life out of you because they will continually trauma dump. And one of the things that I've realized is that people can become arbitrators. People can become defense attorneys for their own pain. And they want to continue to build a case, as you mentioned. They will build a case around their trauma. They will build a case around what they've been through, because instead of healing, instead of overcoming, instead of coming out on the other side, they want to become judge, jury, and executor. They want that vengeance. They want that retribution. They want that recompense. They want people to pay for what they've done to them. They not only want others to know what's been done to them, but they want the perpetrator to pay. They want them to experience some type of consequences. And
Justice.
exactly, right? And they form their own, and I would say it like this, they form their own justice league, where that now you're rallying people around you that will take up your cause. You're going to rally people around your bitterness. You're going to rally people around your offense. You're going to rally people around your resentment. And now you're forcing people to make a decision whether or not they're going to go on this journey with you. And I'm learning that there's a danger with that, because inviting people along that type of journey with you only allows you the capacity. If whatever you don't transform, you're going to transmit. And I believe Lewis said this too. If you don't transform your trauma, you're going to transmit your trauma. And I think that that's something that we need to realize, because if you don't transform your trauma, if you don't transcend your trauma, then what you're going to do is you're going to transmit it, right? You're going to transmit it onto your kids. And it'd be very easy for you to have transmitted some of this onto your kids. It would have been very easy for you to project this. It would have been very easy for you to take everything that you've been through and somehow, some way, not make them answer for what you've been through, but make them quote unquote understand what you've been through. And I hate that phrase. You don't understand what I've been through. I don't think there's probably a worse phrase that could have been coined than that concept of understanding. So here's my question. How do you share effectively without trauma dumping? How do you share without allowing yourself to actually be in a place of chronic victimhood where now all you're doing is projecting and transmitting your pain?
Victimhood is somewhere that we want to visit, but we don't want to live. So I
Mm,
think for me, it was realizing my voice is fully going. That's not ideal, is it? We need our voice. So
yeah.
victimhood is somewhere that we want to visit and we need to visit, because if we push that part of us down that says, I'm not a victim, nothing bad happened to me, and we push and we push and we push, we never actually feel the feelings of what it was like to
Mm,
actually be the victim, to have those things happen to us. So it's somewhere that we need to visit, but it's somewhere that we can't live and we don't want to live. Like we get chronically stuck in that. And when you said, the empathy thing, I think empathy without boundaries is self-sacrifice, because you
mm,
end up self-sacrificing and you end up like giving all of yourself to somebody because of that high empathy, but you can still be an empathetic person with boundaries. And this kind of ties into your question in that, because I am an empathetic person and people know that I'm an empathetic person, and because I share parts of my story, there are a lot of people who are stuck in that victim mindset that think, she can save me. She can save me. She can fix me. And they're in my DMs and they're messaging and they're messaging and they're messaging. And this is where the empathetic part of me wants to help. He's like, I can see they're suffering. I so badly want to help them. And what I've come to realize is that I can't transform anybody in my DMs. That's not where healing happens. Healing doesn't happen in the DMs. And so I started to realize that I can still have empathy and love, but I can also hold the boundary and say, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. But if you do want to transform and you're wanting to know how I've healed, this is why I have this business. Like, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I've got programs. This is why I've got the one-on-one therapy. Like, I've spent 15 years creating a modality that can absolutely get to the root cause of your problem, but you've got to do it. You've got to be the one to get yourself out of the victim mindset and out of the DMs and into the actual work. And that's where most people, like not most people, that's the barrier for a lot of people, right? Because they want someone to understand and they want someone to soundboard off. And it is a really tricky balance, because when you share vulnerable things, you encourage other people to be vulnerable and to share as well. And so I've always found this, like, trying to find this balance of the story of what I've been through. The story is relevant because it's what got me to where I am. And in a big part, it's my credibility, because I can say to people, this is what happened to me and this is who I am now. And I am the example of that. And so my story is relevant, but it's only ever shared in a way that is productive. That is, this happened to me and this was how I overcame it. The accounts and the people that are sharing that are like, we're in the suffering together, never move past the suffering, because they're benefiting from being in the suffering. And so I see so many accounts that are like, how to cope with depression, how to like cope with the days where you can't get out of bed. And all of the advice is from, somebody who is stuck constantly in a depressive episode. And their content is like, instead of brushing your teeth, have mouthwash beside your bed. And it's all just like ways for them to cope when they're having a depressive episode, which so many people are saying this is really helpful for me. But for the person who's creating that content, they're getting a benefit by a following, by validation, by all these things, and they get stuck there. and they're never going to leave that space because they're benefiting from being in that space. And so for me, we have to set the mission. We have to set the mission as something positive and something that's continually pulling us up and pulling us forward. So for me, the words will always be the example. So I'm not just going to trauma dump my shitty life story. I'm going to be like, this really messed up stuff happened to me, and this is where I am now. And you can do that too. So it's like I'm showing them this is what I was, and this is where I am, and this is where I can bring you. That's the only way for me that it feels good, is to actually use it to inspire people. And the amount of people that still write on it saying like, me too, but I'm still suffering and I'm still stuck, and this is my life and this happened to me, but I'm in my fees and I've never had the money to heal, or, all the excuses, right, that they come up with for why it can't happen to them. And the empathetic part of me feels sad for them, but I also say to them, like, I didn't think it was possible for me either. I was holding on to like
Mm.
this much hope at times, sometimes less, like sometimes no hope. And then I would like muster it back up. But I didn't think that I was going to be the one that was the example, but I continually kept moving forward and was like, you've got to be the example. You've got to be the example. And so I think finding a cause that is bigger than yourself also really helps, because for me, it was like, I've got to be the example for other people. And because I didn't have enough self-worth at the time to do it for me, that was my fuel. And then eventually it was like, I need to be doing this for me as well. And that came, but this is where that like higher calling or like greater purpose comes into play. So if we're just sharing egotistically our own story for like continuous validation and continuous support, and you're so brave and you're so amazing and keep going and all of this, it just keeps us there forever, because we're
Mm.
just getting that. And at the end of the day, I see where that comes from. Like, we're getting a need met. We're meeting a need. We're creating a feeling that we think we're missing. Like, I feel empathetic towards those people because I feel so sad that they're stuck there, because I was stuck there for a little while too, to be honest. Like, I came out the other side and then I went into working specifically one-on-one with women with complex sexual trauma. So a lot of them sexual abuse by their fathers, a lot of them torture, sadistic abuse. And it was rewarding, so rewarding, because they were healing and they were like, and it was amazing, but it was so taxing on me to keep hearing it and going over it, and it's me in that identity, and it kept me in that part of myself, and I couldn't move into being a teacher, into like teaching other people how to work with that so that I could move to this next level of self. And so I think we get stuck and we think that this is it. We think that we've achieved our mission. I healed the complex trauma. Now I get to heal it in other women. No, there was a bigger mission there. There was another bigger
Mm.
step after that. And we think that we've got there, but people always say, what's your life purpose? We have multiple, because if we achieve it, there's another one there ready to go. And so, but I think we just stop at this level.
Mm. You said so much in what you just shared, and there's so many different directions that I can take it. But one of the things that you mentioned is living beyond yourself and living for other people. And one of the things that this is something that I'm being confronted with, and I'm not an expert on this. So if anybody's listening to this, I don't profess to be a full expert on this, but I think we do ourselves a disservice. We self-sacrifice and maybe even borderline self-sabotage when we make ourselves the center of our story. As long as we make ourselves the center of our story, then it will always be about what we've been through. It will always be about the hurt. It will always be about the pain. It will always be about the trauma. But one of the things that, again, Lewis Huckstep talks about is he talks about the greater the wound, the greater the wisdom, and turning our pain into purpose. And I think that that's so incredibly important, because I think one of the ways that we can heal effectively, one of the ways that we can heal properly, is by recognizing that not only does life happen for us, not to us, but life is about so much more than just us ourselves. Life is about for you, it's about your children. For you, it's about the community that's around you. For you, it's about the relationships that you have. For you, it's about the countless people that you're helping. And I think there's a certain freedom that comes with that, right? I think there's a certain growth and maturity that happens when we realize that, you know what? We have to live for so much more than just ourselves, right? I have to be willing to live and give of myself to other people. I have to be because something Todd Jarrett said, he says, community reveals, but solitude heals. And I think that's so incredibly important because for the longest time, I would just live in isolation for the longest time. It would just be me, myself, and I thought that was the way that I would heal. But there's something about being around other people. There's something about being in community. There's something about, like you and I said at the beginning, to have those mutual interests and to have a common purpose and to be aligned. One of the things that you said, you talked about a couple of different things. You talked about anger as being a warning sign or an alert or as some type of a trigger. And then you also talked about depression. And I'm beginning to realize through these conversations that depression is an invitation. We've been taught that depression is this negative emotion. We've been taught that depression is something that we need to come out of. But in a recent conversation I had, my guest made a statement that actually it floored me, and I still think about it to this day. He said that depression, instead of depression being something that we come out of, it is an invitation to go lower. In other words, depression is a mirror that reflects to us ourselves. It's a mirror that reflects to us the deeper emotions, the deeper feelings, the deeper thoughts that we've ignored, that we've suppressed. And there's been a whole industry that has been built around trying to medicate depression. And I think for me, depression literally means just to be pressed down. It literally means to be weighed down. And that's been one of the greatest challenges that I've had to face. That's been one of the greatest things that I've had to do is recognizing, like you said, anger is not inherently bad. What is the anger showing me about myself? What is the depression showing me about myself? You know what? The question that I have is what keeps us, right? If we experience that depression, right? If we experience that anger, what is it that keeps us from actually being willing to go deeper? Like you said, is it the memories that we're trying to avoid? Is it the past that we're trying to forget? What is it that causes us from being willing to look at ourselves in the mirror and actually come face to face with all of those emotions and all of those feelings that we've been trying to ignore?
It's the feelings themselves that we're trying to ignore. So I think, depression or anxiety, I think, depression again, like I think there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of that feeling of depression and, ranging from being a little bit sad for a period of time, which can sometimes be a really natural thing. Like some people will lose somebody and they'll think that they've got depression, but really there's a natural grieving process that's happening. So we've got like these scale of being sad and feeling low for a period of time to people who are actually in a complete freeze state, completely dissociated, like dorsal vagal shut down. They've got brain fog, they can't think, they struggle to get out of bed, like they are frozen and they're stuck in a freeze state. And I think there is a difference between depression that's functional and depression that is an accumulation of feelings of loneliness and sadness that haven't been expressed, a full on freeze, like freeze, dissociation, completely checked out, unable to function, unable to get out of bed. And the way that I always think about it is like it's generally as a general rule of thumb coming from the level of trauma. So like this person that's had to like forcibly shut down is going to have had years of conditioning and trauma that has been getting them to the point where their body just actually can't function in a fight or flight
Mhm.
state anymore. And they're so dissociated and so disconnected and they're stuck in a freeze response that they can't pull themselves out because they've become so weakened and so dysregulated. And so there is a spectrum of anxiety, of depression, of everything. And it always does in the clients that I've worked with relates back to the level of trauma. But the problem with these people is potentially with the people who have the intense versions of depression have let it build up to the point of like of almost, feeling like there's no return. A loss of hope really is, depression is a loss of hope as well. And I think the way that I would work with it would be different depending on where they've come from and what they've got. But I think that when we think about depression, to me, I've never met a person with depression who doesn't have the subconscious belief of I am alone. Even if they're
Mm.
surrounded by loved ones, there is always a deep subconscious core belief of I am alone, and they can't receive the love that's been given to them. Like so many people who are depressed or suicidal, and they're like, can't they see they've got friends and family around them that love them? No, they actually can't. They actually can't. Like it's there, and like consciously they know it's there, but they can't feel it and they can't let it in. The person with the mild depression and the person with the extreme depression, they're afraid of the feeling. They're afraid of the emotion. They're afraid, and we're not taught what emotion is in school, and we're not taught what to do with it. And so even when we talk about memory processing, people are like, I'm so afraid to go back into the memories. I'm so afraid. Are you afraid to go back into the memory? Or are you afraid of the shock and the panic
Oh,
and the horror that's going to come up in your body as a result of going back into the memory? It's the feeling. I'm afraid
yeah.
of these thoughts that I have. What are you afraid of? What are thoughts going to do? They make me feel anxious. You're afraid of the feeling. Everything just keeps coming back to feeling and our inability to actually be able to know how to hold a feeling, what a feeling is, what's happening in the body when you're having a feeling, but also how to be with it. Like you said, the reason why people aren't getting better is because I'm feeling a bit panicked. I'll have a Valium. I'm feeling a bit depressed. I'll have some Prozac or whatever medication you're on. I'll have some wine. I'll have a glass of red. I'll have a few drinks, or that'll lift my spirits, or that'll help me out. And we find the perfect combination of things that are going to bring us. And if we look at this in a nervous system perspective, right, we've got our window of tolerance, which is our ventral vagal state, which is where we're in the flow of life. Up here, we've got the red zone, which is fight or flight, and down here, we've got dissociation or dorsal vagal, which is like shut down. I'm out. And we're trying to find ways. And I feel empathy for everybody because they haven't been taught any other ways, but they're like, I'm constantly up here in fight or flight. I need to calm down. What's going to calm me down? A glass of red. That'll bring me into my ventral vagal. And then we've got people that are dissociated and they're like, I have nothing left. I'm stuck in this shutdown phase. I'll have a cup of coffee. That's going to bring me up. And it's an energy exchange. We're trying to we're trying to increase the energy to bring ourselves up into it. Whether we're above or below the window, we're trying to balance energy. We're trying to get more of it or less of it, depending on, because anxiety and panic is high energy. It's too much and it needs to be removed from our body. Then dissociation and shutdown is a complete lack of energy, a lack of life force, a lack of hope, a lack of, will to live. That's why we get so depressed down here in the freeze state, because we're numb and we've got nothing. So we look for ways to feel again. And some of those ways that we can feel again for, some people it's heroin, some people it's like ecstasy, whatever it is, like we're taking things to try and feel this middle balance. Whereas this ventral vagal state or this window of tolerance or this, flow state, we can actually get there through healing, through finding out why so stuck in fight or flight? Why so stuck in dissociation? What's happening there? What's the emotions that are energy and motion? What's the emotions that are continually pulling us back there? Oh, it's a past event. Oh, it's because of all of these things that happen that taught me that I need to live in fight or flight, that taught me that I need to exist there. And so now I'm just going on autopilot and just constantly living in that state. And so all people are really trying to do is addiction is we're just trying to find a solution to the way that we're feeling because we don't know that feelings can't actually hurt us. Feelings can't actually hurt you. They can't hurt you.
Yeah.
Know how to control them and manage them and understand them, you can use them and you can release them. And when I say use, like if I have a day where I'm feeling a bit angry, you better believe I'm going to clean my entire house from top to bottom. I'm going to
Mm.
use that. I'm going to use that energy because something's annoyed me and I'm going to use that energy and I'm going to use it and move through it. And then if there's a reason why, or there's a trigger, or there's a, subconscious belief, I'll work on that. But also I know that I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid that it means I'm a bad person. There's no, and what we do is We have experiences where maybe we expressed anger and someone said, "You're a psycho. What's wrong with you? You're crazy. You're nuts." And so we think, oh, if I'm a bit angry, I'm a crazy psycho nuts person. And if I'm a crazy psycho nuts person, my partner's going to find out and then they're going to leave me and I'm going to end up alone, depression. And so we're just
Hmm.
like, we're pairing, we don't just have subconscious beliefs about who we are, we also have subconscious beliefs about our emotions and what they mean, when really an emotion is just an energy in motion. And a lot of the time, the reason the emotion is coming up is because it's our baseline, because we've had so many experiences of that frequency happen and our body's like trying to bring it up to heal, because the body's always trying to heal. We talk about this in a physical state and people are like, yeah, yeah, you cut your hand and the wound repairs. It's also trying to do that on an emotional level, but we don't identify it as that. We have the feeling of anxiety come up, and instead of going, this is some old panic resurfacing that I need to sit with and feel and move the shock through my body somatically, and I need to express and I need to uncover where that's coming from and shift it, we go, oh my gosh, I'm panicked again. I've got anxiety. I've got panic today. I've got anxiety. I'm going to take some medication. What's wrong with me? Where's this coming from? And we're just like going in circles. And so we actually have to understand that the body's trying to heal. And every time you feel the shock or the panic or the sadness or the grief or the rage or whatever it is, it's information. It's information and it's there to be felt. It's not there to be numbed and pushed down. And, people say to me, if I open it up, I'll never stop. I'm afraid that if I like lean into it and I start crying, that I'll go into a depressive episode and I'll be stuck crying for the rest of my life. And I'm like, that's just not how it works. It works like that. It feels like that because you cry for a bit and then you take the medication and then you come off the medication and all the emotions are still there. But that's because the medication just numbed it. If you actually had to spend that amount of time processing it, you'd probably be out the other side right now. So
Hmm.
it's taking intentional time to understand what an emotion is, how to sit with it, how to shift it. And also this fine balance of like, am I just angry because like something's actually like validly made me angry? Like, am I just angry because I've just seen on the news something shitty and I'm like, oh, the world? Or am I angry? Is there rage? And one of my favorite women, Florence Given, Floss, has a podcast and she always says, if it's hysterical, it's historical. And I love because
Hmm.
a bit of anger, it's like, that pissed me off a little bit, but I'm in control of that. If my partner says, oh, I'm going out for a drink with the boys tonight, and I'm like, and I have this huge response in my body, and I'm like, he's going to do this and he's going to do that, and we should just break up, and it spirals into this huge thing, that's a trigger. That's
Hmm.
hysterical. That's historical. So the level at which we feel those emotions to certain things can tell us you need to go deeper here, or I'm a little bit pissed off, but I can control it. I'm a little bit shitty about that situation, but I know I'm going to be able to release it. That's the way that I kind of judge things.
You know what? I've heard that quote before. If it's hysterical, it's historical. And it carries with it information. It carries with it information about who we are. And there's something to be said about sitting with our feelings and actually feeling the full range of our feelings. Because I appreciate what you said, that what we are actually afraid of is the feelings. And I think like there are some people that it's what they're afraid of is actually fear. They're not afraid of what's in front of them. They're afraid of fear itself. And ask a man to protect his wife if someone is threatening her life, and he will, without hesitation, do whatever is necessary to protect his wife. Ask a man to protect his children against someone that would do them harm, and he will, without hesitation, do what's necessary to protect his children. But ask a man to protect himself, ask a man to feel a feeling, and he does not know how to do it. And I don't think it's just true of men. I think it's true of women as well, where we don't want to feel it because feelings carry with it a responsibility. And I think a lot of us, including myself, we're afraid of the responsibility, because what I found is that more often than not, there are versions of ourselves that we created when we were trying to survive. that are actually needing to be destroyed. If we want to move into the next stage or the next season or the next phase of our life, the versions of ourselves that we created while we were in survival are not able to come with us. And I don't think for a lot of us, it's that we're stuck like we've been trained to believe and like we've been taught. I think when we say we're stuck, what we're actually doing is grieving a part of us that we know is not serving us any longer. We're grieving a part of us that can't come with us into the next phase of our lives. And I and it's so easy to do. It's so easy to wear masks, and I've done it my whole life, wearing masks and allowing my identity to be suppressed. Eventually, if you do that long enough, you reach a point where you begin asking the question, well, who am I? Right? You look at yourself in the mirror, you wake up one morning, and then you're just like, who am I? And you talked about heroin, you talked about drugs, you talked about all these different things. And I'm convinced two of the greatest hindrances to healing are the masks we wear and the things that we do. I would call it masks and masking, right? We'll take an opiate or we'll take a drug or we'll have a glass of wine or we'll take a medication. We'll do all this stuff as a way of masking what we're actually going through. There's a conversation that I had with somebody recently, and she said that there's a difference between dealing and healing. Dealing is simply just managing it, and it can even take the place of suppression. But a lot of people are just dealing it. They're just learning how to manage what they're going through rather than actually healing it. And that's something that I had to work through, and I'm still working through it. I lost my dad during the pandemic. I remember standing by my dad's hospital bed when he breathed his last. I watched him die in front of me and what that did to me in terms of grief. And I don't think I ever fully grieved the way that I needed to. We think that we're grieving, we think that we're healing, but one of the things that I learned is that I wasn't grieving properly. I wasn't grieving the way that I needed to. And then fast forward a couple years later, and I experienced a second death, but it wasn't the death of a person, it was the death of my marriage, and that marriage would end up in divorce. And so that added a whole other layer of grief to it. And now I'm carrying the grief of my father's death. I'm carrying the grief of divorce. And a lot of people don't know how to process grief. A lot of people don't know how to really overcome it. And it's interesting because I had a conversation with somebody and he talked about the 5 stages or the 5 phases of grief, and he said that the first 3 aren't even necessary. I think it's denial, anger, and there's one other one that's the 3rd. But he said the 2 that are the most necessary is depression and acceptance. We talked about depression, but it's actually accepting what happened. So, Jessica, where I want to take this is I want to talk about grief because I don't think it gets a lot of traction. I don't think a lot of people talk about it. What is it that keeps us from grieving effectively? What is it that keeps us from actually processing it the way that we need to? Like I said, I'm sure there's a part of you that maybe grieved when you had to cut your father off and cut him out of your life. I'm sure there's a part of you that grieved maybe the loss of that relationship because you said there was that struggle to love him. So how do we manage grief and what do you think actually keeps us from grieving effectively?
I think that grief is like I don't think it's like a one and done situation. I don't think it's like, here's the grief, here's the period of grief, and then move on, that's done.
Right.
I think there's different levels, there's different layers of grief. And I think that a lot of what we call grief is our subconscious mind playing things that are feeding into our pain. And what I mean when I say that is a lot of the time there's a feeling there. There's a feeling of loss and there's a feeling of sadness. But
Mm,
where grief gets tricky is that I see people get stuck at the stage of grief. And what happens is they have this narrative of, I've worked with a lot of people who've lost people and they're like, my life ended that day. I don't know how to
Yeah.
live without this person. And those narratives are actually what's keeping them in the grief. And why would they want to stay there? Because they feel sometimes like they're honoring that person by staying there with them. And because they feel like they don't know what's beyond it, they don't know who they are without that person. And they've never had to really think about that because they've always had that person there, especially if it's a parent. But I think grief come like me applied across so many different areas of life. So I'll give you an example of a different type of grief is that I spent a lot of my children's younger years, my boys are 8 and 10, and I spent a lot of their younger years completely like that was when everything hit me, when my children were really small. And so I was in the thick of it. Like I was in the thick of like flashbacks and cutting my dad out, and I had psychosis at one point, and I had a complete nervous breakdown. And as the healed version of me now, I look at them and I look at photos, and there's been periods where for weeks where I will cry because I will grieve the fact that I don't remember anything about their childhood. I missed their childhood because I was so dissociated and so disconnected. I didn't enjoy them, and I wish that I could go back, and I wish that I could just have one day with them as their 2 and 4 year old selves and just soak it all in and just really appreciate them. That's what we're missing. But we're missing the moments. And this is why grief pops up, when you meet a new partner and you get married and your dad's not there. And the grief hits us in these moments, not because it wasn't always there or not because we're not healed, but because there's a new layer of our life, a new version of ourselves that has this moment where we reflect back, and there's nothing wrong with that. I had this period where I was like, it's really fucking sad that I didn't get that with my kids. Like, I miss that and I'm sad about that. And had a couple of really big cries, and then I evaluated my thinking. And I was like, is it really productive for me to be thinking I missed their childhood? Is it really productive for me to be thinking that I can't get that back? These were the thoughts that were ruminating. I've missed it. I can't get it back. Like, just constantly in this loop of like suffering. I had to go into my subconscious. And after I'd felt the emotions, part of feeling the emotions was also realizing that those beliefs don't serve me anymore. And this is where I always come back into like, what else could be true? And what else could be true is that I absolutely was there for moments, and I still showed up as the best mum I could be. And my boys are like the most happiest, healthiest, like they're just the most amazing little humans because I was there and I was still me and I was still present. And so, I think a lot of people experience this with death because they're like, I should have done more. I should have been there more. I wish I had have said this. I wish I had have said
Mhm.
that. This is what I work with people in one-on-one work is, this is going to sound super woo-woo and like really intense, but the way that I think about it, right, is that quantum physics has proven that there's like multiple things happening in one time. And when like for instance, when we have a trigger, right, the part of our brain that keeps time goes offline. So we actually are technically feeling like we're back there in that moment. And Joe Dispenza talks about this with like negative thoughts. And when you're visualizing bad things, like it's like you're there. Your body thinks that you're there. Your body can't tell the difference, and your brain can't tell the difference between then and now. So taking that in a positive way in a healing and therapy session, I take people back to that last moment. And I have people that have really negative, like scary, like, like they can't remember their parent before. All they can see is that last breath, or all they can see, and they're stuck in that part of it. We can heal that. We can process that. We can also go back and we can have those conversations that we didn't get to have. And this is where doing that through the subconscious, doing that in the correct brainwave, doing that somatically, doing that energetically, doing that all of the ways, you actually feel like it happened. You know logically that it didn't, but you feel like it happened. So I'm taking people back, and they're going back into the last moment or the second last moment where they were with this person and saying, I love you and thank you so much for everything you did for me. And I'm so grateful for all the time that we spent together. And they're getting it all out of their body, off their chest, and they're hugging them and they're telling them they love them and they're doing something beautiful with them, and they're coming out of it. And when they think of that person, they feel that feeling of love and connection and completion. And there's no what if and what could have been and what wasn't said, and the guilt that comes with that, the shame that comes with that, the fear that comes with that. All of that's processed and shifted. And so it's one of those things that, like, different types of grief will come at different times, but when we process something correctly, it does shift. And
Mm.
it might be slightly different narrative or different circumstances that come up that's like that feels a little bit different. And that's where we get the opportunity to go, what's my subconscious beliefs about this? Because people really beat themselves up for what they did or didn't say, negative or positive. Like, I didn't tell them I loved them enough, or I didn't tell them how much they fucking ruined my life before they died. Like, it can go either way. You don't know. But we're holding it all in. And words are energy. Words have great power. Words are, you know, what you think and what you say. Like, how many times do we think something that we just can't say out loud? Like, we're so afraid to say it out loud. That's because we know intuitively that words are so powerful. And so to be in a theta brainwave, to be in that relaxed, deep brainwave in your subconscious and to say those words, it just leaves your body. I mean, we do somatics and we do energetics and we do all the other sorts of things around that. It my take on grief is that, yes, it pops up, but there's always something underneath it. There's always a way that we're beating ourselves up. And the reason that we do that is because, like I said, we want to stay in that suffering.
Mm.
Because, if your parent only knew the version of you that suffered, and all of a sudden you do this healing work and you transcend that, it's like you're not you anymore. And if you're not you anymore, you're not connected to them. But that's our mind putting a really small limitation on love that is like this big.
Do you think it's possible to live in a state or live in a place of being fully or completely healed? Or do you think healing is an ongoing journey that we continue to experience, maybe for the rest of our lives? I don't want to put a time frame on it because there's a lot of talk about the concept of healed past tense. In your experience with the people that you work through, do you think it's possible to ever reach a state of being fully healed? Or do you think healing is something that is an ongoing journey that we continue to experience day over day, week over week, month over month?
I was just speaking about this morning, actually, with a friend on a walk. And I believe that healed, to me, when I say I've healed, and people often say to me, like, what do you mean you've healed? Healed, I will be a healer for life. Like, I will be healing for life. I will always be aware of my thoughts, of where they come from, of who I'm showing up as. Is there a better version of me that I can be? But I think you get to a point where healing feels beautiful and easy and fun. That's healed.
Mm.
Because there's new layers, but you're excited to uncover them, and you're like, "Oh, what's this in here?" Like, I was cracking up laughing in my last healing session that I had, because we just
Mm.
were having so much fun with it, because I was like, "Oh, there's another little layer. Oh, where's that little subconscious belief come from?" That's when you know that the work has worked. Because for me, there's no fear about booking a session. There's no fear going into it. I'm open. I'm ready. I'm highly self-aware. I'm not afraid of my emotions. That, to me, is healed. Yes, life will be lifing. Like, my partner, my fiance, we're getting married in August. He could turn around tomorrow and say that he doesn't love me anymore, and that would be awful. And that would be painful, and that would be a heartbreak. But every part of me knows that I know what to do. That would just
Mm.
be life. Like, it would be awful, and I'd go through a period where that would hurt, and I would cry, and I would grieve him, and I would be sad that we didn't get married, and I would, be heartbroken for that relationship, but I know I'd be okay. There's no part of me that fears going back into the darkness, into a hole, into depression, into not wanting to be here. There's no part of me that fears that anymore, and I think that's healed, especially for people with complex trauma. You know that you can handle anything that comes your way, and the new
Mm.
the new layers are fun and easy. I think that
Mm.
that's because there is forever identity shifts, and there's shit that can happen in the world, and how we navigate that, if you're healed, is that you know how to move through that. Like, you know how to not become a victim to the external circumstances. A war breaks out, but how do we understand that in terms of us and in terms of our existence and in terms of what we take on from that? And there's so much to it, but I think healed for me is being in control of your emotions, having high level of self-awareness, but also being able to have fun with life. The bit that people miss is that they're so stuck in the healing work that they're evaluating every thought, they're feeling every emotion, and they're so serious about it. They're so serious. Like, I've got to feel this, I've got to do that, I've got to push here, I've got to do that. And I'm like, so what do you do for fun? When do you just like, when do you connect and love and be silly and have fun and just actually enjoy life? And
Mm,
again, I know that people have healed when they're just like, I was just living my best life and having the best time. And then this thing just kind of like hit me and it felt really big. And I thought, I'm going to come to you to work through that layer. I'm like, that's a healed person because there's no resistance, there's no protection, there's no fear that something's come up and they've got, I know where to go, I know what to do, I'm not scared of this, I'm going to face it, I'm going to go in and uncover that next layer. Unhealed people avoid, distract, numb, push it away. They don't ask for help. They spiral down. That to me is the difference. And there's nobody in the industry that I've ever met, even people that I looked up to and then got to know, that doesn't have some form of past things just popping up, little patterns, little triggers, or gets a little bit rocked by things that are happening in the world.
mm,
You know, some of it is valid. Like, we're consuming so much information that is affecting our energy and our emotion every day. Like, I don't have Instagram anymore. I message you from the business suite because from the back end, because I don't want the app because Epstein, war, all these things affect us. And if I,
yeah.
as a person who is healed, you still take that on and you see it enough and all of a sudden your subconscious is going, "Ooh, doom and gloom," or the fear, the panic, it leaches in when you're
Yeah.
consuming it all the time.
I think that's why it's, and this has nothing to do with anything that we've said, but I think that's why it's so important for me to train my algorithm, right? So I'm not seeing all of those different things that you mentioned because social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or TikTok, and here's the other thing, that social media and the algorithm feeds those things. People can tell me that they disagree with what I'm about to say, but it's interesting because I think our phones, they hear us, they listen to us. I think Facebook and Meta and Instagram, they all hear us. And then next thing you know, you find your Instagram being flooded with reels based on a conversation that you've had. And for some people, that might seem far out there. For some people, that might seem like it's absolutely crazy. But I'm convinced that Instagram and social media is designed to feed whatever you're thinking, whatever you're going through, whatever you're feeling, that's the content that most likely you're going to see. And I've had to train my algorithm. I'm still training it. I don't have it fully processed. I don't have it fully to a point where I'm fully comfortable with it. But I want to touch on something with healed because up until now, I don't think I've ever fully thought about it before when we talk about healed versus healing. And I think I would use two words in connection with healed, and that's excitement and enjoyment. Excitement, like you mentioned, where you're excited over the healing journey that is still in front of you. You get excited about the work that's still ahead of you. You get excited about what still needs to be done. And there's a certain joy, there's a certain peace, there's a certain rest in knowing that there is still a work that is ahead of you, but you don't dread it anymore. You don't fear it anymore. It no longer has a hold on you. Now you're able to embrace it. Now you're able to welcome it because you see the progress that you made. And I think that there's even a connection between the excitement that we have for future healing and recognizing the progress that we've already made and looking how far we've already come and understanding. And I think that there's something to be said about that, where the progress that we've made can almost be fuel. It can almost be used to propel us to continue the process, to continue the healing journey. But The other thing is enjoyment. How can you tell when you're healed? When you have the ability to enjoy life more than you were. And again, healed not as a fullness or complete reality, but you've healed enough, you've healed in such a way where you're able to enjoy life. You're able to go to the movies, you're able to go out to a nice restaurant, you're able to go out with your kids, you're able to go out with your partner, you're able to travel. You're able to do all these things because you're not so I think we can become so focused on healing that it can become overwhelming. And I'll give you an example. There are certain topics that are completely unrelated to emotional healing, nervous system regulation, somatic breathing, parts work, shadow work, all of these different things. There's certain conversations that I enjoy having that have nothing to do with this. Today, I had an opportunity to have a conversation and record it with an author whose material I have long enjoyed. I've enjoyed it for years. And today, I actually had the opportunity to have him on and have a conversation. And it was one of the greatest things. I'm going to say it this way, and some people might find this kind of controversial. I think it's okay to take a break from your healing journey to remember what life is about. I think it's okay to take a break from all of what you've experienced and simply, like you said, remember what it was like to have fun. Remember what it was like. And this is why I think another person that I follow on Instagram, Ryan Moresby White, he talks about heal the boy, heal the man, heal the girl, heal the woman. And I think that there's a part that of us that every now and then, I don't know how frequently this needs to be, but every now and then we take a break and we just remember what it's like to go to the beach and enjoy ourselves or go to the park or be silly or joke and I think that that might be another element of this healing journey is when you're able to either discover or rediscover your personality. You're able to discover or rediscover who you are. And that actually leads me to another question because you experienced a very complex childhood. You experienced a childhood that most will never even dream of, most wouldn't wish on their worst enemy. In everything that you've been through, has it been about healing the girl that experienced so much, or is it about inventing or reinventing the woman that you're trying to be? Because some people would look at you and they would say, like you mentioned, go back to those parts where you experienced the trauma, go back to those parts. Or is it maybe a combination of both? And let me just repeat the question. Is it about healing the girl that experienced the complex trauma? Or is it about reinventing or inventing the woman that you're called to become? Or is it somehow a mixture of both?
It's a mixture of both. I can't become the woman that I want to become at each stage without understanding what's limiting me. And what's limiting me is a past version of myself. Even to this day, small examples of like wanting to expand income or wanting to, step into, I don't know, whatever it is, like whatever it is that I'm working on at higher levels, when I go into it and when you're like, where is this subconscious belief coming from? It's teenage me. It's this
Mm,
moment. Like there's no identity upgrade without first shifting and healing an old version of you. And it is like it's like a million deaths because you grieve that part because and a lot of the time we have resistance to removing or to actually healing that part and resolving it because it got us to where we are. But I always remind myself in healing sessions that got us to where we are, but where we're wanting to go, she can't come. And it's not necessarily her, but it's the behavior. It's the way that she learnt to express or to cope or to communicate or the way that she learned to think about herself, we can't be both. We can't be her and her because she lives within me. And when the end of those things are happening, she's reacting, she's responding, she's taking over. And so we need to calm her down. We need to resolve her. We need to heal her. And that doesn't mean that she doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that she's not there anymore, but it means that the way that she perceives that situation is in line with how I want to currently perceive that situation, which means that if there is a situation where I was feeling excluded in the past and I'm wanting to feel included in my current experience, I have to go back and allow that young girl to feel included so that I can have the imprint of feeling included to bring it into my current life. So it's both. It's both
Mm,
because we need to heal the girl because she shows up as who we are now. And there's no like identity upgrade that you can do through sheer force. And this has been proven time and time again with people who have this worthlessness and they push and they push and they push and they get $1 billion businesses and they're like this big name and everyone who knows who they are. And you sit down with them and they're absolutely miserable. And inside,
mhm,
they still feel worthless because through
mhm.
sheer force, you can push yourself into a new identity on the outside, but
Yep.
how you feel on the inside is always going to still be the same. So absolutely, you have to go back. You have to heal the girl. You have to heal the boy. It always comes back to that. There's never a case where there's not some lingering moment from the past that has shaped the current behaviors that we have. So specific as well, like like I work with women in business showing up online and they just freeze when it comes to like filming themselves or recording. And it's always coming from somewhere. It's always coming from a past version where
Mm,
they were embarrassed or shamed or like it just doesn't, nothing comes from nowhere. Nothing just we can do it through sheer force, but we don't have the good feelings inside. And that's what I'm finding with a lot of people in the industry. They're either not excelling or they're excelling through sheer force, but they're not happy.
mm,
I think that's where we've got to, and similarly to what you said before, I think it comes back to as well those stages of healing. And I very early on developed what I called the 3 stages of healing, which was realization is step 1. You need to realize that healing's even possible. So many people don't even know what their subconscious mind is. So we have to have that realization of like, we can change our reality. And then we go into the work. But the 3rd stage is coming out of the work. And I've been saying I don't want my clients to be with me forever. I want them to come out of the work and live the life that they tried to create. Live the life
mm,
that they've actually created. Live in that version of themselves that they wanted to be. And if there's another progression, they'll be shown, they'll know because they'll feel uncomfortable with where they're at. And there's another progression, but you live life to the fullest and I did the same thing. I realized that I was doing the work too much and I took 2 years off. I wasn't allowed to do another certification or read any books on healing or consume any content, watch any documentaries. I had to live my life to the fullest and have fun. And it was actually so hard. I realized I was quite addicted to learning something and I've integrated it back in now, but it's in a fun way. It's where I'll read my book for an hour and then I'll go out and live and I can flick between the two, but it can become quite obsessive to dig and dig and
mhm.
dig, cover and uncover. And we just, what's that emotion? And we're pulling things up and we're seeing all these different therapists and healers and we're constantly
Yeah.
uncovering things when we actually then don't have time to integrate and to live our best life.
Mm. See, that's something that I struggle with is even in these conversations. All these conversations are great, understanding who I am, understanding my identity, my worth, my value, focusing on my healing. I think there's two sides of the spectrum. You mentioned spectrum before. There's on the one side of the spectrum, on the one side of the pendulum is avoidant, where we completely avoid the healing altogether. But I think the other part, I'm going to use another word and I'm going to say instead of avoidance, it's abundance. And what I mean by abundance is the healing work, there's an overabundance to it. So we either avoid it or we want it to abound. And I think that there's finding a balance between the two. I think there's a willingness that we have to have where we are not going to avoid it. We're not going to be so far on this side where we avoid the healing altogether, but we're not so far on this side where healing is in such abundance in our lives where we forget who we are because you can almost form a negative identity around healing. And that may seem contradictory for people, and people may look at me and look at you and say, how is that even possible? but I think it is so incredibly dangerous to focus all of your time, effort, and energy on quote unquote healing that you forget to live and you forget to enjoy. And if your journey of healing comes at the expense of your living, then I'm convinced it's a form of self-sabotage and it's another form of self-sacrifice. And you're sacrificing any progress that you need to be made. And again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. It is okay to take a break from healing. It is okay. You are going to be okay. You're going to make it. You don't have to always be sitting in your feelings. You don't have to always be exploring your thoughts. You don't have to always be journaling. You don't have to always be exploring your inner child. You don't have to always explore that because you can actually, in my opinion, stunt your growth and stunt your progress. And again, this is a struggle that I have even now. Even in these conversations, it'd be very easy for me to focus so much on healing, 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 growth, 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 identity, identity, value, worth, all of these different things that I lose sight of what really matters. And I would even go a step further and to say that you can focus so much on your healing journey that you forget how to be present in the lives of those people that are still in your life. You
To be
forget.
human.
Right, exactly. You forget how to be human. You forget how to have fun. You forget how to enjoy. You forget how to live. You forget how to actually be the person that you've created. And we can almost, I'm going to say it this way, you can almost form an identity around healing and it can actually be another mask that you wear. It can actually become another way of coping, another way of dealing because you spend all of your time. It's like if what Todd said is true, community reveals, solitude heals, then what you might actually find yourself doing is isolating yourself and cutting yourself off from the people that either need you the most or the people that you want to be around the most, right? Think of what you said when you were talking about the the younger years of your boys and how you were worried about not being present because of going through everything that you went through. I think the reverse is true. You can spend so much time worrying about healing and growing and that you can actually do the same thing. You cannot be present, you cannot enjoy life. And now what's happening is those that are around you in your life are getting a part of you. They're only getting a version of you. They're not getting the full version. And I've never really even thought about it before until this conversation, and that's why these conversations are so good. That's why it's educational for me, and I'm learning because for me personally, Jessica, I have to learn how to enjoy life again. I'm going to say this to someone, and it may be the hardest thing for them to hear. It is okay to have fun. Sometimes the most healthy thing you can do is have fun. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is take a nap or go to bed early or watch a movie. Sometimes that can bring about a greater measure of health in you than anything else that you would think that you need to do.
I think of it like seasons as well. I think I always talk to my friends about like, oh, I'm in a season of this, I'm in a season of that. Like it's not, I feel like we're so interconnected with the earth and, there's all these pictures of like, the symbolism of like our lungs and trees. And I believe we're so connected to the earth. And I think that we do go in seasons and it's normal for us to go into a winter season and into self-isolation and uncovering and feeling. But we do that so we can have our spring, so that we can bloom, so we can have our summer and we can have our fun and we can have our, and then we start to shed a bit and then we go back into our cocoon. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with us doing that. And I think what you said is so true, is that like we don't actually have time to integrate. If we just go healing, 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 healing for 5, 10 years, it can become another way to actually avoid everything, because we go from one therapist to the other and we never get to the actual root. But also, we don't integrate into everyday real life. It's good in theory. It's the same as people who heal in isolation and then trying, and that was me. I'm healed. I've healed all my trauma. I don't get triggered. I'm fine. And then they get into a relationship, and that relationship shows them all of their relational wounds and triggers.
Yep.
You need the season of doing the work on yourself, but you also need the season where you heal in relationship. And I think we try to like put it into categories and we try to put it into boxes, and we're like, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. But actually, I think it's like, if you can find the balance between living your life and enjoying your life and having fun, and to me, it's like, it's feeling alive. That's what we
Mm,
want. Like, we want to feel alive, but in a calm and regulated way, because so many
mm,
of us feel alive when we're like pinging on our trauma, when we're like, oh my gosh, this and that, I'm so excited about it. And it was actually our fight or flight. And we think that's alive, but we want that aliveness without the panic. We want the flow. We want the excitement, the passion, the pleasure, the joy. We want connection with other human beings and love and laughter. And that's what we want. And so we have to like do the healing work. And, if I was to say to someone the ideal way to do it would be, go in, if you've not done any healing work, like go in and spend a good few months going in deep and uncover it and uncover all of those subconscious beliefs and those past traumas, and heal and shift and learn about yourself, and then give it a break and try and step back into your normal life and your normal relationships and your normal routines, and then see what comes up. And if there's something that needs to be shown, it'll be shown, because all of a sudden you're like, this healing works great. I'm feeling really good. And then all of a sudden something happens and you're like, I felt depressed for like the last week. I'm feeling really sad all the time. And I don't really know where that's coming from. I'm going to go deeper into that. And you go deeper and you have that next period where you go deeper and you uncover some layers and you're really intentional, and you spend a month or two shifting, and then you go back to living your life. And this is the balance that I try to teach people, is like how to know when to go deeper and when to just leave it. And
mm.
I think that's the ideal flow. But what happens is people do a little bit and then they maybe jump out and then they have something happen and then they're like, oh my gosh, I'm worse than I was before and I'm spiraling and I'm gonna end up this again, and they're all panicked, or they just avoid it altogether. But I'm
Mm,
guessing that anyone that's listening to this is probably not avoiding it altogether. There's a number of people who are also just learning, listening to all the podcasts. I have people that are obsessed with my podcast. Every episode they listen to, never booked a session, because they're learning and learning and learning and listening and listening. But they never
mhm,
actually book the one-on-one session where they're going to transform, because they're getting a bit of dopamine and a little of like, I'm making progress by listening and learning. But listening and learning is not the same as going back in and reprogramming your mind, speaking to your inner child, somatically releasing, expressing emotion, shifting it like out of your physical body and out of your mind. Completely different experience to listening to the podcast and me saying the reason you do X, Y, Z is because of this, and going, oh, now I know. Not the same.
In Australia, did they have different breaks in school? So spring break, winter break, Christmas break, do they have those breaks during the school year?
We have 4 school holidays. So we have like one that's in the middle of winter, one is right now, and then we've just come out. The summer one is like the 6-week long one. So we have 3 2-week breaks, and then we have a 6-week break.
Okay. So the reason why I asked that question is because I think that that's probably the only thing. You mentioned earlier that education doesn't teach us about emotions. It doesn't prepare us how to manage them. It doesn't prepare us how to overcome them. But if there's one thing that the educational system, I think, does right, it create a break from learning, because you just talked about learning, 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 never growing, listening to podcast after podcast. But I think in America, they have those same things where it's okay to take a break from learning, right? As you're talking, all I could think of is schools in America, schools in Australia, where they recognized that, okay, you've learned for this period of time. but now you need to take a break because the mind can only absorb so much before eventually what you're doing is you're going to be counterproductive. You can become so filled with knowledge and you can spend so much time learning that what you actually do is, I'm trying to think of how I want to explain it. You can spend so
Yeah, I love that.
well, yeah, because as you're thinking, it's like you need to take a break from learning. And you've spent so much time learning about history and algebra and chemistry and English and Spanish and all of these different things that and this is why I think the same is true of social media. Like it is okay because you can even use Instagram and TikTok and Facebook as another form of education. And I think for me, I would even do well with that myself because even as an adult, when you may not be in school anymore, you may not be learning anymore, but you may be overworking. And it's okay to take a break from work. That's why you get PTO. That's why you get vacation time. I had a job where it was mandatory to take 1 week of vacation every year. It was mandatory. It was company policy for you to take a break because they wanted you to take that time off. But I think the one thing that the educational system does right is they teach students that it's okay to take a break from learning. The problem is we graduate after 12th grade. Maybe we go into university and we do it, but then we forget, right? We forget. We graduate from university and all of those breaks, and we forget. And now we are constantly filling our time and our space where our mental capacity. A lot of us are overstimulated, and a lot of us are overstimulated and overeducated, right? Because social media is one of the biggest ways that you can be overeducated in your life because you can find you could type in any topic you want in Instagram or Facebook right now, and you'll immediately get a number of reels where people are going to talk about that topic. And I think that that's so important because social media, in my opinion, can sometimes be a detriment and a danger to you being able to be human and you being able to live because you spend so much of your time either chasing after those dopamine hits or chasing after the learning or chasing after the knowledge or chasing after the healing that you forget what it's like to live. You forget what it's like to enjoy life. You forget what it's like to be present. You forget what it's like to live in community and relationship. And for some people, they spend it's almost like social media and online is a part-time job, 20 hours a week, doom scrolling or watching or listening to podcasts and all of these different things that we do to fill our time because either we are uncomfortable with ourselves to sit by ourselves or we don't know how to be present with those people that are in our lives. We don't know how to be present with our partner. We don't know how to be present with our kids. We don't know how to be present with our friends. We don't know how to be present with other people. And I think that there needs to be a reprogramming, there needs to be a shift where people understand how to not only live again, but they need to learn how to live in relationship again. They need to learn how to live and really enjoy being around other people. And again, it goes back to this whole avoidance or abundance. There are people that avoid, and then there are people that choose to have an abundance. And I think the point about healed and healing is when you find the balance between the two. You're not avoiding and you're not abounding. You're living in the middle where you're able to educate, but you're also able to enjoy.
And I think, like you said, our brains are wired for picking up specific information. Like we have our reticular activating systems telling us what to focus on, and there's already millions of bits of information happening everywhere in every second of every day. And then we're adding a layer onto that with social media where we're literally absorbing. And we're not just absorbing, we think that we're absorbing content, but what we're actually absorbing is other people's energy. other people's emotions, other people's perspectives,
Um,
opinions, and their subconscious beliefs. And so we think that we're being educated, but actually we're being educated from a perception of a person. And so the person who says, nervous system regulation is no good, you've got to do this. And the next person that says, nervous system regulation is everything, it's powerful because blah, 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 blah. Everyone's speaking from their experiences and everyone's speaking from their own bias and their own perception and their own subconscious mind. And so we've
yeah,
gone from being highly influenced by the people in our current world, which is like our parents and our friends and family, to being influenced by people all over the world and a number of them at any one time. Like I know myself that removing myself came from measuring myself against the super gentle mum who spends every single day with her children, but also measuring myself against the entrepreneur woman who's running a multi-million-dollar business, but also measuring myself against the mum who home cooks everything and measuring myself against, and we're taking in all this information of all these different people. And it's like, this is right. This is right. This is how you do it. This is how you do it. And our subconscious just goes, holy shit, I'm so behind. I'm
yeah.
so out of whack. I'm so behind. Like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing it right. And it's one, obviously, that's not their entire life. There's so much a pathway that you can go down with that. But I think, yeah, what you said is so true. It's an abundance of information that is so overwhelming that it actually causes us to stay in a paralysis and we don't live life. And when you go out into nature, everything slows down as it should.
Mm, yeah.
And with social media, it's all fast. And so we're like getting attuned to like our attention span's shorter, which is causing the fight or flight to be worse. And then we're getting out into real life and we just don't even know how to be. And yeah, it's
Um,
such a wild world. But yeah, I think not enough people have that discernment to go, what am I consuming? What am I believing about what I'm consuming? Am I comparing myself? How many people am I comparing myself to? What's their beliefs? Where have they come from?
um,
Why am I taking their advice? Why am I listening to them? We're just absorbing it all.
there's one other thing that I want to say, sort of as we wrap the conversation up, and it's two words that I've seen over and over and over and over again. Everyone and their mother seems to be a coach to this type of person, to this type of an individual. And the two words that I'm talking about are high achieving. I see it all the time on social media. It's
I talked about this morning with Lewis because he talked about his customer and we were talking about high achieving and I was like, and Lewis, I just feel like everyone works with the high achieving person.
it is, right? It's I see it all the time on this. I help high achieving men heal without the countless hours of therapy. I help the high achieving woman. And everybody, it seems like everybody is high achieving. But here's what I will say. I was talking with Todd Jarrett the other day, and he talked about this emptiness that is found when you get to the top, right? I think of the actor Will Smith that reached a point where he could buy anything he wanted, go anywhere he wanted, do anything he wanted. And when he got to the top, when he reached the pinnacle, he almost had this moment where he's like, is this it? Is this all that's left? And that's why if you open up Netflix, you'll see different like docu-series where he's traveling the world and he's challenging himself, because I think that there are a lot of people where they they form this high achievement around shame. They form this high achievement around some type of part in their past that didn't feel loved, that didn't feel accepted, that wasn't approved, that wasn't validated. They've carried the shame. And now, as a result, they give themselves to high achievement and overperforming. And I do think that there is something to be said about the high achieving man and the high achieving woman, but it's almost as common and prevalent on social media now as the word narcissist or toxic. Like it's all like high achieving. Honestly, if I see one more reel about the high achieving man or the high achieving woman, if I see one more person that is quote unquote a coach for a high achieving person, I think I may just delete social media altogether. But with that being said, right, and there is a space for it. But the last thing that I want to touch on is this concept of shame, where people want to overachieve and they want to overperform and outperform and reach the top. And that's why you have the successful athlete or the successful entrepreneur, the successful business owner, the person who's reached the top, the multi-millionaire, the one who has everything that you could possibly want in life, and yet they realize that there is this complete emptiness that they have. And now, it's possible, if it's possible to learn too much, I am convinced it's possible to attain too much. It's possible to achieve too much, right? Like if I see high achiever, well, all of a sudden I'm going to look at it through the lens of, okay, this person has maybe achieved too much, and you've overachieved in your life. They're the overachiever. They're the ones that in school, tried to overcompensate and overachieve because they wanted to prove themselves. And if it's possible to overlearn, if it's possible to maybe overheal, then it's possible to overachieve. And now you have a lot of men and a lot of women who they find themselves in a complete state of emptiness and loneliness, where now they don't know how to enjoy life anymore. I've made all the movies, I've won the championships, I've done all of these, I've built successful businesses, but I am completely empty. And now they realize, and I think that that's why it's so incredibly important for us to not even place as much stock as we have in external things. Right, high achievement. Like if that is your goal, if that is your objective, if that is your mission, then eventually you're going to reach the point in life where you realize that it might not be shallow, but you might not find as much meaning and worth and value in it. And you may reach a point where your identity was so wrapped up in your achievement that now you don't even know how to live once you're at the top.
This may be my own judgment, but I feel like a lot of people niche into that and focus on that because high achieving people generally have more money to spend and they invest in
Right.
high ticket. So they're a great audience because they're invested, they work on themselves and they got the money. But also I feel like I was just thinking when you were saying that, like high achieving to me is also coming from the fact that we have glorified fight or flight. Like I know that in my most messed up years when I was the most dysregulated, I was stuck in fight or flight chronically. And everyone used to say to me, how do you do it all? You're superwoman, you're Wonder Woman. Like, how do you do it all? How do you get your businesses to that point? And how do you have the kids? And how do you do all of this? Like you're Wonder Woman. Because when someone's hustling and pushing and using fight or flight, everyone's like, you're amazing. Look at you go. Look at the results. But if you're depressed and you can't get out of bed, no one's like, yes, go queen. Like no one's
Right.
celebrating that. So we glorify, as a nervous system response, we glorify fight or flight because it gets results, it gets us places, it moves the needle. And so everyone's getting stuck there because they can see that the people that are pushing and hustling and pushing and hustling with the fight or flight are actually getting the results. And it just continues this cycle of us being stuck in fight or flight. And then everything that caused us to become in fight or flight in the first place just gets pushed down, but gets built on. And like you said, there's nobody, I think I said earlier, like the person who feels worthless, who does everything they can to accumulate wealth to feel worthy, and they have all the wealth and they still feel worthless inside because you can't bypass it. And because actually for a lot of people, trauma is fueling the high functioning. Like they can't move past their trauma because the trauma is what fueled them to get to where they are. And they think, well, if I'm not traumatized anymore, I won't keep pushing because I won't have that energy. Like I literally have a client that said, I'll come back to you in like 5 or 10 years, but I don't want to get rid of the fight or flight because it's actually doing so well for me in my business. And I was like,
Ooh,
if that's the way you want to
wow.
live, yeah, like she was that highly self-aware, but she was like, I know, and I've seen you slow down as you've done more work. And I know that's going to happen for me. And I know that I'm going to be more present and more alive and all these things, but like, I just need my business to get to a certain amount of figures first. And I'm like, cool. when you reach that point and you realize that your anxiety is the worst it's ever been and everything is not where it is, I'll be ready for you and I fully respect your process. But there's nothing I can say to that person that doesn't want to do it, but it's glorified. And so they're stuck in it because it's so glorified and they don't
Yeah.
realize no one's saying, and the people that are saying, like I've been saying for a decade, no amount of external things is going to make you feel whole and complete and loved and safe. It's got to come from within. And everyone's like, yeah, whatever. We're just going to try it this way first. We're just going to try it this
Yeah.
way first. Because
Yeah.
they, because it's addictive and because it's, like I said, glorified, it's socially acceptable. Like nobody is looking at the person that's spending months in bed and saying, you're,
Yeah. So good. I think it's a fitting conclusion for our conversation to end with high achievement and talking about the struggles. And I think that there's a lot to be said about that, but I think it comes down to a question of purpose. What are you living for? What are you It's like the conversation that I had with Ben Lowe. Um and he was talking about what gets him out of bed every morning, and he talked about his purpose and his function. And when he was talking about purpose, he was talking about your why do you get out of bed, why do you show up? Like, you have to have that purpose that defines who you are. Your purpose has to be completely independent from just gonna go out on a limb. Your purpose has to be completely independent from your career. It has to be independent from your job. There has to be something greater that you're living for, and even beyond yourself. Your purpose, and you touched on it earlier, and it's kind of where I want to end the conversation, is you have to live your life for others. You have to recognize that your life is bigger than just you, and when you give yourself in that space, when you reach that part of of yourself and your life where you're able to live for other people, you're going to discover a level of purpose that you weren't otherwise aware of. You're going to discover a level of identity. You're going to discover a level of value. You're going to discover a level of worth, because now you're not living for the external variables. You're not living for the external factors. You're living with the goal and the intention of making an impact and leaving a mark and leaving an imprint on society and making a difference. And I think that is what you're doing. I would like to say that's what I'm doing, trying to make a mark. I'm not coaching people right now. I'm simply having conversations, but I think that's what I'm ultimately trying to do with these conversations, is inviting people into the conversations where hopefully, and let me say this, I don't think I can leave a mark on society by myself. I need other people to come alongside and work together in a partnership. And together we rise. Together we make a difference. Together we leave a mark. That's why this conversation is so good, because we talked about mutual alignment. That's why aligned missions are so incredibly important, because we have the ability through this conversation and through your conversations that you have to actually be able to live beyond yourself for others and make a difference. It's like the Michael Jackson song, "If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change." And it's the song "Man in the Mirror." Like, it's a pop culture reference. Yeah, I think it's fitting considering there's a movie coming out about him. But I think it's called Magic. I think is the name of the movie. Magic is, or maybe no, it's called Michael. I think it's just called Michael. But I think that's so important. We need to look at ourselves in the mirror and recognize that we've been called to live for something so much greater than ourselves. And so, Jessica, this has been the longest conversation that I have had since I've started these conversations. So
yeah.
something about you Australians, that you guys love to talk, because Todd is Todd is one of my longest conversations. Ben was one of my longest conversations. Lewis was one of my longest conversations. I think Ash was one of mine. So I something about Australia, and you guys, you love to talk, and I love it. So that is not meant to be a negative perspective at all, but I have enjoyed the conversation. I am grateful for you and the work that you do. I'm grateful for the time that you gave to having this conversation with me. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learned so much, and I know there are going to be other people that are going to hear this and they are going to find some benefit themselves.
I hope so. That's the goal. That's the goal. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you inviting me on. And yeah, it's cool to chat to different people in different parts of the world and share the message. And yeah, hopefully some people get some, there's, all different people at all different stages. So hopefully there's a little bit of something for everybody, whether you're just starting or whether you're deep into the work. I feel like we've really covered it off.
Yeah, we've covered a lot. I feel like between the conversations with Lewis, Todd, Ash, Ben, yourself, I feel like I've covered so much ground, and this is a formal invitation for a part two at some point in the future where we'll have another conversation. So consider you formally invited to have another conversation, and I look forward.
I said, I love it. If anyone has questions, we can do a specific episode. If they've listened to it and they're like, but what about this? What about that? We can get into the nitty gritty.
Absolutely. Well, you know what, Jessica? I want to again thank you for your time. Thank you for your willingness. And I will continue to support you. And if you're not familiar with Jessica, go ahead and look her up on Instagram, Jessica Ella, and support her content. I support her mission. I support what she does. And so, once again, thank you for your time and thank you for your willingness.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.